Alrighty, if y'all have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. I'll be receiving them from people on our team, and we'll make sure that we try to get them answered if we have any time. My name is Gavin, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm an employee at Fresno County's Department of Behavioral Health, as well as a facilitator for our panel, Mitigating Risk Factors, Affirming and Accepting Environments for LGBTQ plus Youth. Today's discussion is about an hour and a half and will be recorded and available on YouTube and Facebook. Panelists will introduce themselves and be asked a variety of questions that will help us identify what rejection and acceptance look like, what challenges LGBTQ youth face, and how to support them through it all. At the end of the presentation, they'll be given time to share their contact information, where you can find them should you have more questions or if you'd like to connect. So let's get started. Question 1, please introduce yourself, including your pronouns and what professional, educational, and personal experience you have that shape your perspective on the topics being discussed today. We'll start with April.
Hello, my name is April Taylor Salary with pronouns she, her. I am an LMFT and operate my private practice, Affirming Family Counseling. So all my professional educational background is in helping the LGBT community, specifically trans folks, in addition to having a trans child myself, which definitely sparked the journey down this path in my career, but also navigating the experience of having a trans child has also been a large part of that for myself.
Okay, well, I'm Dr. B, and pronouns are she, her, and I am a clinical psychologist as well, and I have my own business, Dr. B's Live a Life Print Coaching and Consulting. So we do lots of training around ACEs and trauma and resilience. That's the passion, and it really transformed from a private practice into an educational journey to expose the world to how we become a more resilient and loving society. I also have a podcast called Delusional Optimism, which is also about trauma and resilience and ACEs and just understanding the neurobiology of development so people can navigate through challenges. And my perspective on I'm part of the LGBT community. We all have our own story. We don't speak for each other. We're our own people. We all have our own journey. And so I think that's my perspective today, is that we're not all the same. Our lives are intersected with all kinds of other things. And so we have to acknowledge that that's true for everybody. This is just a piece of who we are, but it needs to be recognized, validated, and honored always.
I think it's my turn. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Cruz, and I'm the manager at the Fresno EOC LGBTQ plus Resource Center. My undergraduate degrees are in substance use disorder counseling and psychology, and my master's degree is in human services, organizational and social service focused. I grew up in Fresno as part of the LGBTQ plus community, and as manager of the Resource Center, I work with those clients daily who are experiencing the Central Valley while navigating the coming out process and dealing with friends and family and peers, and also systems in the community in the Central Valley that are not always the most affirming. So we provide a lot of resources, and I'm happy to be here today to participate in this discussion with you all.
Hi, everybody. Happy Pride. My name is Brian Poth. I use he, him pronouns. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Source LGBT Plus Center. We're located in Tulare County. We serve Tulare Kings and now Fresno counties. And like some folks here on the panel, I'm part of the community. I know it's shocking. I identify as non-binary and queer, and that's something that I have just figured out over time, especially working with our youth. But I'm here to participate today. I'm always excited to hear from other queer and LGBTQ folks, and always excited to learn. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you all. So we'll start off with the first question. Parental rejection is a common fear in the LGBTQ community, and experiencing it can lead to harmful consequences, such as elevated rates of suicide attempts, depression, and other negative mental health outcomes. How has this rejection looked to our youth, and what are some more subtle ways that rejection can appear?
I think for some youth, it can look like parents not even acknowledging it, telling them that that they can't experience that or it must not be true. I think in my private practice, I've seen a lot more of the subtle rejection by acknowledging that maybe they're non-binary or gender fluid, but then not using the proper pronouns or reverting back to their dead name versus their preferred name. And then just kind of saying like, okay, you can be out to me, but don't tell anybody else. I think parents feel like that's acceptance, but it still feels very much the same as just being told that your existence isn't valid. And so for myself, dealing with a lot of kids and helping them navigate the conversations with family members about how those microaggressions make huge impacts.
I would add to that just very briefly that, the subtleties are where it's all at. Like every single one of us on this panel who are part of the LGBT community, we feel it. You don't have to tell us how you feel. We know how you feel because we feel it. Sometimes you say it, and that actually gives us a choice to get the hell out of there. But we feel it, and young people feel it too. The difference is that we as adults have different resources and the capacity to move away from it. And with resource centers like the Source and Fresno County Resource Center, there are places for youth to go, but with COVID, that's been super challenging. But nobody has to say it. It's there all the time, and it shows up in a zillion ways. So
yeah.
I agree 100% with what both of you all have said. And just wanted to point out that, some of the youth that we see, or even, maybe they're not under the age of 17, young people that we see in the center, it's usually very much they're feeling depressed and anxious and suicidal over the fact that the parents or friends and family are just not accepting. And it's really sad because it's something that seems like it could be so simple. And one of our future projects we're hoping to start very soon, hopefully in person, because that's how these things work best, is to get a family group, a parents and friends of type of group for peer support and in the center. Because that's a lot of the phone calls we get as well. The parents who want to accept but aren't sure how to navigate the situation. So, and if we can get family and friends to be accepting and learn how to interact and be compassionate, it can really save a lot of those mental health challenges that our youth face and young people. Because a lot of times it manifests not just in suicidal ideation or attempts, but in substance use disorder or acting out sexually just to feel loved by someone and accepted. So that's what I have to add about that.
Yes. To add on to what Jen was talking about, the risk factors for LGBTQ youth are so much greater, than our straight or cis identified youth. Suicide and substance use disorder are sometimes 4 to 5 times as high. In some cases, there's trans kids are 8 times as likely to complete or attempt suicide. And with family rejection, all of those numbers increase threefold, fivefold, depending on what you're talking about. And there's a really thorough evidence-based study called the Family Acceptance Project that followed LGBT youth from the Central Valley, in fact, over a 20-year period to look at outcomes based on family acceptance or rejection. And if they've got great resources there to look at what it looks like to be accepting and what it looks like to be rejecting. And even mild rejection, like Dr. B was talking about, counts as a negative response to a kid's coming out. So LGBT kids, you know, we are getting those messages. They're getting those messages all the time, sometimes through the types of shows that the family are watching, the types of comments, the things that make religion, politics, it all plays a huge part in the system of like the family unit. That's why supportive schools are so important, because a lot of kids aren't going to be accepted in their family. And so having teachers and people who are out on campuses that can be that support system for those kids until they're old enough to leave those situations is really important, because statistically 1 in 4 kids will be thrown out the day they come out to their families. And so they're homeless. 1 in 4, that's 25%. That's a lot. So it's, you know, it's, the statistics aren't great. And that's why talks like this are so important.
For sure.
Thank you for that and for sharing the statistics on why this is an important issue to be tackling. You did touch on, you know, experiences that people might have at school or other public environments. So outside of the home, what might LGBTQ youth be experiencing that could result in adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs? And if we could start with Dr. B, and go from there.
ACEs, yes, adverse childhood experiences. Well, we all, I mean, most of us experience ACEs at least one in our lifetime, if not more. And if you don't know what an adverse childhood experience is, it's one of 10 identified experiences before the age of 18. And let me start with saying that marginalized communities, and the LGBT community is obviously a marginalized community, experience trauma and adversity at an exponentially higher rate than hetero or cisgender populations. So right off the bat, right out of the gate, this population is at much higher risk. And there is a direct correlation between adverse childhood experiences before the age of 17 and 9 out of 10 of the leading causes of death. So 9 out of 10 of the leading causes of death are directly correlated with adverse childhood experiences, which include abandonment by a parent. So that can happen through death, divorce, or rejection because of sexual orientation, gender identity. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, because you're part of this community. That can happen. You know, do you see how there's this balance around ACEs, but ACEs become exponentially exacerbated when we're talking about a marginalized group like the LGBT community. So in that sense, we have to look at the systemic issues that we have in our organizations, in our education system, in our policing systems. We can't just look at it as this is one person's problem or this is a family's problem. These are systemic issues that are organized to discriminate against this particular population. And we happen to be in a wave right now of creating a whole slew of new laws that are targeted at trans youth in particular, or trans people in particular, but also just the LGBT population. If you go to Arkansas today, right now, anyone can deny medical care to a person who's part of the LGBT community just because they want to, because of religious, moral, or ethical ideology in their head can say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm the ambulance driver, but I'm not going to pick you up because I think you're gay. Like that is terrifying, and that is real life. That's not a TV show. That's not an opinion. That is just a flat out fact. So we all need to be taking this seriously and holding, as leaders ourselves, others accountable for their need to respond to this and act on it for our youth and for their families. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, and if anybody else wants to touch on what experiences that might look like to our youth, I think your perspective offered a really good holistic understanding of why this is really important. The rest of the panelists could touch on the specifics. That would be great too.
For myself, from more of a parent perspective, and kind of touching on what Brian had said previously about like what the home environment somewhat teaches and how that impacts our kids. My child's in a very conservative school district. And so one of the ways that he's most recently been impacted is that when he was outed, he also identifies as bisexual. When he was outed to a family, from a friend to their family member, they instantly wanted my phone number because they wanted to talk to the parents, because the parents should be aware of what this child is doing or what they are up to. I gladly accepted the call, but they never called me because, yeah, my son was like, I don't really think they want to talk to my mom, but they can call if they want. But that message that it gave to my son of like the danger of being outed, right? And the danger of adults. Like he always thought that the biggest fear was his peers. And so then to find out that, yeah, your peers are also somewhat dangerous, but what they're learning and hearing at home also directly impacts him and his experience. And luckily he has a home that is accepting, but there are so many people that can't even go home and process that rejection or that fear because they don't feel safe at school and they don't feel safe at home. And so touching on what Jennifer and her program is offering is needing that safe space outside of home and school, because those aren't always safe environments. And I know for my son, this is going to be something that he always remembers, because that feeling of like just being bi isn't okay. And then he's like, they don't even know the rest of it. So like, I'm not even safe to share. And that's the truth. He's not. And that's saddening. And it's just so many kids just have that experience that will always impact them.
I just wanted to echo real quick what Dr. B was talking about as far as our systems and how youth and adults are experiencing bullying, discrimination, and just microaggressions in schools and work and organizations. Part of our work that has become a regular thing is, and we're starting from within, right? Our staff is always learning, terminology is always changing. Fresno County is big, and there are many intersecting, ethnicities and cultures and things that, all play a part of the complexities of being queer and fill in the blank with whatever intersection. So we're constantly trying to stay on top of learning about those things, and also starting within EOC, because there's something like 40 programs, training for competency in all the different departments. And, cultural humility, and having panels of people telling their stories of how it's impacted them to work with organizations or businesses and being queer and Hmong or queer and Black or queer and Latinx. So that's something we're offering, and we're starting with EOC, and anyone else who's interested has been contacting us, and we've been able to schedule those out. And I know that the source does a similar LGBTQ plus type training. So I think it's important to tackle it first within our own organizations and then throughout the community.
Yeah, I just want to talk about ACEs for a second. It's a hot topic in California. Our Surgeon General is like big on ACEs, and it's a hot topic for sure in like mental health and physical health. I do want to also echo that marginalized communities experience ACEs at a much higher level. I know that we did a staff screening just to see. And the screener itself is very, very triggering for LGBT folks. So I just want to let people know. I mean, these are very simple questions. You know, there's only 10, but a majority of our folks, scored 5 or higher. You know, most of us have experienced these adverse childhood experiences at a much higher rate. The issue that I have is, there's an assessment tool, and I know that Dr. B talks about resilience, and the LGBTQ community is resilient. You know, we have been relying on our communities to become our families for a very, very long time. Chosen family is really important. But what I think needs to happen in our systems is that once someone is assessed or a child is assessed, then what, right? If you don't have a community that supports LGBT folks, what are you going to do with a kid that scores 8? What are you going to do with a family that scores 8 if you don't have a place for that kiddo to go? So I think it's a great assessment tool. I think it's really important. But this isn't telling us something that we didn't already know. It's just quantifying it, and seeing it on paper can be really triggering for some folks. So I just want to let people know that that's been our experience.
Can I jump in before we move on? Because I want to add to that. And Brian, you're spot on with that. And I say this all the time that, just doing the ACEs screening is not helpful. Like, not helpful. Sometimes some people feel a little bit empowered, but it's not anything we didn't already know that, we had trauma in our childhood or, whatever. So if the organization, if you don't have a reason to find this information out that then is followed up with solid supports that are going to be worth the risk, because it is triggering, and we do training all the time, hundreds of people. We've trained over 400 people in the last 6 weeks. And I say, organizations, do not just screen your population because it's the hot thing to do right now, because you're just creating a hot mess by getting people triggered. Every time you read the question, were you abused as a child, or did this happen? You go through a micro version of that experience again. And so organizations together need to say, hey, who's going to take responsibility for this? And right now with the Surgeon General, it's the medical community. So guess what? Our resource centers don't need to be doing that. If youth come to the resource centers and say, hey, I have an ACE score of 5, then they can pick it up from there. Or in a private practice, if they're screening and actually they're already in a supportive spot. But we have to be really very careful about using these screenings in general. But then when you talk about using this with a marginalized community and a particularly sensitive community at the moment, the LGBT community, we need to chill a little bit on that idea until we've thought it through and we've decided, okay, why is this important? Do no harm is important, and the screening has the potential to empower, but it also has a much higher potential to do harm within inexperienced hands and minds.
Thank you for that. And it really highlighted how rejection and adverse experiences are not just really personal, like with the experience that April shared, but political, like with what Dr. B has been sharing. And all of you really highlighted the importance of leaders in the community to not only collect the data, but act on it. Now that we know sort of what rejection entails, what does it mean to be affirming and accepting then of our LGBT youth? And how can this look in a day-to-day life? We can start with you, April.
Okay. For me in a private practice setting, it looks like having just things around, little things sometimes, either pins or stickers or certain magazines or things on my shelf, like books, so that they know from the beginning that they're in a safe place. But then also like with a new client packet, right? Like making sure that I'm asking the right questions or leaving the wrong ones off. It's really important that we understand that just the environment can be affirming or triggering, right? So just being aware of those things and how, we kind of carry ourselves, like with the importance of pronouns, just as cis folks, our job of sharing our pronouns and just kind of opening up that discussion so that folks who need to share their pronouns or would like to feel safe and supported. I think it's just remembering that microaggressions are really simple, but also micro affirming things are also pretty simple also and very impactful in what they can do. I think the other part to that is just if your child or your loved one tells you, this is my name and this is my pronoun, no matter how difficult it may be or how confused you may be, but just doing what they tell you, meeting them where they're at and accepting their name and accepting their pronouns and using it. Even if you have all these questions and it maybe feel very heavy for you, just know that you using them and meeting them where they're at is going to go a long way in their overall happiness and perception of themselves. It's just meeting them where they're at. And then also remembering what we say, right? So like an example I can think of as far as like a celebrity is when Elliot Page came out and let us all know the truth about them being their name and their gender, and the discussions that we have at home about those things, whether our children or our loved ones are LGBTQ or not, those discussions really impact how they see themselves and how they see others, and remembering that whether they're out or not, it still may be a truth for them. And so that we're affirming in all of our actions. And of course, then teaching our children to also be affirming of their peers is huge. And so for me, it's just always making sure that I do my best, no matter who's around or what role I'm in, whether that's a role as a board member to a local nonprofit or as a mom or just as a person just of myself, just walking down the street, right? Is that I take that time to be intently affirming so that, I don't know, so people that see me as safe. Little things like putting a rainbow flag out in your front yard right now, right? That's pretty affirming. It lets your neighbors know, it lets the kids know that this is a safe home, that at the very least they have some understanding. So it can be very simple or as complex as you would like it to be. But I think there's plenty of opportunities for it. And the part I would like to add as a clinician is being aware of the terms. They do change. They change often. And as someone who identifies in the community myself, who appears heterosexual, right? Because I'm in a hetero relationship, as bisexual, is knowing those terms even around people who you don't know are in the community, because you don't know who around you may not be out or who may not know it for themselves yet. And so using the terms correctly and staying as aware of them as possible, because that shows folks too how affirming or accepting you are and how safe they are with you. If you're using a term incorrectly, maybe you're aware, but that doesn't mean that they're safe with you. And so when I teach for clinicians, the terms, it's use them, say them, practice them, so that when you need to use them in a clinical setting, you don't stumble over it and then appear as if some reason this is bad or awkward. So if this is a population that you maybe don't have a lot of experience with, doing your best to be aware of them and all cultures, right, the best that you can, and utilizing the terms and different aspects of that culture, specifically for the LGBTQ community, so that you don't look awkward and like you're really trying, but maybe you don't really know. All those things go a really long way for the community.
I would say too, just be honest. Being affirming just means just telling the truth. And if you don't know something, I love that yes, practice, but we're all like lifelong learners here, I can tell. But we're going to mess up. We're going to make mistakes. If you don't know how to say something, then ask somebody and let them teach you what you don't know, because we are not the same. Just because we share a community does not make us all the same. Our stories are different, our tragedies are different, our highlights of our lives are different. And so just being honest is affirming, because when we share our lives, when we're allowed to share our lives with other people, then guess what? We then role model for young people that, you know what? There are grownups in the world who have happy lives, and it's not all happy, but it's not all awful either. And so just, I would say, being honest, because if you try to fake it, people know. That's our neurological system, polyvagal. It's delusional optimism on Monday. It will tell on you if you try to fake it. So stop it. Stop telling me that you're an ally when you're not.
Before Jen or Brian add on to this conversation, there was a question of somebody wanting to know if there's a preferred resource to help folks stay up on the updated terminology, and a resource that's probably better than asking the person themselves to explain everything. So do any of you have a good site to refer them to?
So for trans, usually, and some of the attraction terms would be genderspectrum.com. They always stay really up to date with it all, and doing research themselves and having clinicians that work in the communities across the country to update those terms. But I would agree that, at least for clinicians, right, is that yes, if you don't know something, don't fake that you know it, but please don't ask your client to educate you. There's so much that comes with feeling like somehow I need to be your educator now when I'm coming here for support. I shouldn't have to do that in my vulnerable position. I should be able to come here and just be supported. And so if you don't know, please reach out. But yes, not to the client. And I would happily answer any emails or have any dialogue with you. And if I don't know the terms, because I don't know everything, right, then together we could somewhat figure it out where to go. Brian did put in the chat that PFLAG is a good place to go to. The other one that I really like is GLAD. They usually stay up to date also, and will put out pamphlets and stuff. So that's the one that I always go to when I'm going to do a training or some type of speaking, to make sure that my definitions and what I'm sharing are the most relevant and up to date. Those are good ones for me.
Thank you. And Jen or Brian, do you have any more input as to what it means to be affirming and accepting, and what that can look like day to day for our youth?
So much has been said that I echo, and I just want to agree with April on don't ask your client or youth or kid to educate you. Human Rights Campaign also does a glossary, and I think there was another one I was thinking of that slipped my mind just now. BelieveOutLoud.com. So Google is your best friend, and if you can find, Brian's dropping them all in the chat there as well. But yeah, on a daily basis, day to day, there's little things that can be done, like April said, and be kind, be genuine, because really, as Dr. B was mentioning, like the community, or especially the youth, they're more intuitive than some people care to give them credit for, and it's really just important to know that, be genuine, be kind, and do what you can to educate yourself on all of those terms and how-tos. With all of the information at our fingertips via the internet, there's really no reason why we can't all continue to learn. I know that I spend time when I can. Not that there's all this free time, but my reading list just grows daily, and I'll even just play audiobooks as I'm driving, because there's, just like I said earlier, the intersections in the Central Valley are so vast that we'll be learning about this for a lifetime. So, but be kind, be genuine.
Yeah, I would just, yeah, I wish I knew the definitions of accepting and affirming, because they're to me, I can just explain to you as an LGBT person, when someone accepts me, it means that they might not agree with me, but they understand that I have like rights and privileges, and my identity is real. It's not up for debate, right? They might not get me like really, or even celebrate me or invite me places, but they're not going to argue my existence, right? And affirming really means that I'm in a place that not only accepts me for who I am and believes me when I say I'm non-binary, I'm queer, whatever, but that there are things in place in that, either in that person or in that environment or in that actually celebrate me and uplift my existence and affirm that I am exactly who I'm supposed to be, that I'm not different, I'm not special. I might be special, but we're all a little bit special, but that there's nothing weird about being LGBT, that it's a totally natural part of human existence, and that, we think you're awesome, and these are the reasons why. So it kind of goes a step further. I think where people are in the valley is tolerance. And that is a really dark place to be, because it's so full of judgment, and tolerance is not acceptance. And so I think I would urge folks to move from tolerance to at least acceptance. But if we can get to affirming, that would be great. But there's a lot of tolerant folks that I wouldn't want to sit across a dinner table with or have kiddos around, right? Because what's coming out of their mouths and what you're feeling in the room is actually the opposite of what you would expect from someone who's accepting who you are. So yeah,
Brian, could you explain what you would think the difference is between tolerant and acceptance for the audience?
Yeah, so I think tolerance for me is a darker side. It's not accepting the person. You don't believe you're going to tolerate their existence. They can share space with you because it's sort of the right thing to do. But you might not be able to participate, right? There's a lot of tolerant churches. There's a lot of tolerant organizations where you can't really participate in a way that's meaningful. But also that if you really got down to it and asked people how they felt about you, they would disagree. They might call it a lifestyle or a choice, but they'll allow you into spaces of privilege by not confronting you. But it's a really, really icky place to be in tolerant spaces. We can feel it as LGBT folks that you're not safe. You don't say things, you're not yourself. You're playing, if you can kind of blend, you blend because it's the only safe way to be. So even though we've been taught to be tolerant of others, it's a very dangerous feeling when you're LGBTQ to be in a tolerant space, because it really does feel unsafe. I don't know if that helps, but.
I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense in a sense of like tolerant being that it's socially acceptable to rather it's not socially acceptable to ridicule or judge out loud, but yet that it's still happening. Feeling like, yeah, they have to be nice to us or they have to hear us when we say that whatever our belonging is, but not necessarily, yeah, wanting to spend time with us or wanting to like us. It's more feeling like they have to. And I would agree that the Valley has definitely gone backwards, in my opinion, into a very tolerant place. I wouldn't say I ever experienced it as overly affirming at all, but I felt like there for some time we were in acceptance at least, but it does feel recently that we've taken huge steps back to where there are places that we cannot go, right, with my child, or letting him be out and not being stealth because it's tolerated but not accepted. And so yeah, it just doesn't feel authentic or safe. It's a very icky place.
And tolerant is a hierarchy, right? Like tolerant means that you're better than me right off the bat. And that's just counter to equity and equality, that we're all working across so many intersections of our lives for, equality, that tolerance is just, it's just not anywhere near good enough. And I would agree with Brian and April and Jennifer that, we're not there. We are teetering on tolerance. Like, we'll accept it for right this moment, but oh my goodness, we've got work to do.
Thank you all for that and for sharing your experiences with what it means to be tolerant versus accepting and affirming. We did sort of touch on questions earlier. If people have questions or they're not familiar with the terminology, it was put in the chat. So for folks listening on YouTube or Facebook, it'd be pflag.org, hrc.org, glsen.org, or genderspectrum.org. To go off of that question, though, for those who are not quite familiar with the ins and outs of the LGBTQ community, but do want to support youth, what can they do when they have those questions in that moment? And what questions or statements might do more harm than good when interacting with youth?
So in the moment, somewhere to go, like Jen said, Google is your friend, right? So I teach about this stuff. I'm in the community myself, and when my son texts that Demi Boy was where he felt he identified best, I had like 22 seconds from his bedroom to my home office to figure out what that meant, because in that moment I had no clue. And so I figured it out and just, was there for him. And if you don't know, it's just being present and just listening and figuring out the answers to those questions later. If you think, well, maybe I shouldn't ask this, then don't. Just don't. They shouldn't have to educate you on what those things are. Just be accepting and hear them. And then any questions you have, there are tons of resources. At least of 3, right, resources that you could go to ask those questions and get those answers. But when your child comes to you, asking those questions can say, like, if it's in a same-sex attraction, it would be like, well, then who's going to be the guy in the relationship if you're both lesbians, right? Don't say stuff like that. Just don't. If you really have that question, you Google or contact somebody else, but just, or anything along that line. It just says that you don't understand and that you're not accepting or aware, even though you may not mean to. I think that's, for me as a parent, the biggest takeaway. Your intent of the statement is not relevant. It leaves an impact and you can't always undo that impact. So being very aware of what we say to our children in that moment, because you can fix it later to you, but that doesn't mean that they ever really trust you with that information. And so being very cautious in the questions you ask is the safest, in my opinion.
I agree with that. And just to reiterate that intent does not always equal impact, right? And I think part of that question was about if you're allowed to tell other people when people come out to you. So definitely, if you all are listening, do not out anyone, whether it be their sexual orientation or gender identity, without them either asking you to or having that conversation beforehand, whether it's your own child, a coworker, a family member. Be very careful, because in certain settings, that's a matter of safety for the person. In Fresno, we are still dealing with, clients that come in who have been assaulted on the streets for their gender identity or for, even looking queer. So that's a thing for sure. So if someone does come out to you, I always, thank that person for trusting me with that information, and ask how I can best support them, and as parents or as teachers or people who are dealing with young people, or maybe a friend who comes out to you, I think it's important to be very careful, as April said, about the questions that you ask. And right before this call, I actually got a phone call from a parent whose child had come out to them, and they want to know all of the things that they can do to be, helpful and affirming. And so what I did was ask them to write down all the questions, and I can call them back after this meeting to provide as much of that information as possible, because I think that's, education is key, and figuring that stuff out, especially for somebody in your household, right? And with my kids, so I'm a parent, and what I try to do on all topics is leave things really open so that they can ask questions. I think that children often feel that we are judging from all different aspects, right? Like, you need to act a certain way, you need to be a certain way, don't embarrass me, that kind of thing. And it's like, if you can keep those lines of communication open, then it will be very helpful as a parent in many areas, even if your child isn't part of the LGBTQ plus community. So that's my input.
I would add just one thing, and I'll probably be a little bit of a left turn on this response in terms of not asking questions. Because I literally had somebody, and I'm not a youth, so there's a difference there. But a genuinely loving friend of mine asked me some questions about, my life yesterday. And because she didn't know, she happened to be at an event that I was at, at City College, and had some legitimate questions. And she didn't know, even though, yeah, she could Google them, but she wanted to know what I thought. She wanted to know how I felt about it. And because our relationship is a real relationship, I'm 100% open to anybody asking me anything, as long as they're doing it from a loving, compassionate, sensitive, learning place. And so I think that the relationship determines whether it's okay to ask questions or not, even of young people, because there's a 40% reduction in suicide for LGBTQ youth when they have a loving relationship in their lives. Just one. They don't need 100, just one. We almost cut the suicide rate in half. So that relationships are feelings, and we know when we're connected to somebody like that. And so we negotiate that. Everybody is not the same. So there are certain people that I invite to ask me any questions, because I know they want to learn, and their family didn't teach them. Their church didn't teach them how to be, my friend. But they want to, and they want to do it right. So I invite that. And then I think that we model that for children and youth when we trust them to learn how to let people be wrong and let them be the experts on themselves, even if they're 5, even if they're 9. Like, I don't know what every 5-year-old is like, especially one who already knows that they're gay, lesbian, trans, however they identify. I'm not the expert on their lives, so they're going to have to tell me, and I'm going to have to ask questions. And I want our relationship to define that, not a general rule, if that makes sense. But it's tricky. Like, there's never just if all of this were super easy and smooth, we could just have one book and be like, okay, read it, do it, it's fine. But we don't have that.
I think both of you brought up a great point, or all three of you brought up great points in that it's not always a good idea to ask questions when the outcome of that question could result in mistrust. But it could be a good idea to ask questions when you stop to think, is this question going to benefit me, or is it going to benefit the person that I'm trying to support right now? And it seems like in your situation, Dr. B, your friend had legitimate questions and they were from good faith. Whereas sometimes what can happen when you're reacting to a situation is the question is judgmental and in bad faith. And that can make a huge difference to all of us.
Exactly.
I think you just said a key word there, Gavin, which was reaction, right? Reacting to. I think if you consider like the diversity of the Central Valley and all the different, whether it be cultures or religious views, especially when dealing with your family or children, many people are parents, and many of them have been raised in environments culturally or religiously where they're truly afraid for the soul of their children once faced with, this new information. So the key as a parent is to not react with that fear and judgment, because I can tell you this, the kids who have been raised around that, whether it be culture or religion, and I was raised in a religion that was very anti-LGBTQ, we already are afraid we're going to hell. We're already scared that we're going to burn. So for a parent to reinforce that fear is very detrimental. So the best course would be not reacting and maybe discussing those types of things with either a friend or someone who knows more than you about the community, so that potentially you don't have to blurt those types of things out to your children or family and reinforce the fear they already have of being a bad person or being morally, corrupt or any of those things.
And Brian, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, it's very complicated. I mean, I've gone just in the last 5 minutes, down all these scenarios about when it's okay to talk and when you ask and what do you ask. And, I think in a lot of ways, when just from where I am as a leader of an organization, and when people come into the LGBT center, they're there for a purpose, right? So we're there, we're holding space, we're safe and supportive, and even we make mistakes, right? So there's a lot of times we've created this form and it's not right. It triggers somebody within the first 3 questions, and we thought we were doing the best and we followed best practices, and there have been studies on this, but guess what? Our community doesn't like that question. So we've had to learn to say, hey, we messed up. you're right. We're going to take that question right off, because 6 people in the 10 person focus group said, I don't like that question. Doesn't, we're listening to our community all the time because our folks here are telling us what they need. And so we just listen to that. And sometimes it's counter to what like the whole movement is saying, like, because of where we are or where people are or what they've been, or where they're at in their lived experience. I think as adults who've had the privilege to do lots of work on themselves and understand lots of things, like I'm one of those people myself. Like I've been in a lot of therapy, I've done a lot of work. It took a lot of resources, and not everybody has access to that. I can dismiss things that might be like marginal, like questions. I can navigate that a little bit better. But for our youth, you say one thing to that kiddo and that could be it. I mean, just trust is broken. They're already at risk for suicidality. And that could really be like the straw that breaks the camel's back. So you don't really know. So I think to wrap it all up, we just listen and we respond to what folks are telling us, how they want to be talked to, how they want to be treated, what language to use, what language is okay and what isn't, because it does change all the time. And we get it wrong a lot of the times. So.
Thank you. And I think one thing is certain is having a lot of humility in these conversations and knowing that you're not the center of the person's coming out story, they are. So I really appreciate what y'all had to say about this. We did get a question about supporting youth when other family members or other community members tell them that they'll grow out of it or that they don't know what they want, or basically if somebody is facing youth or facing rejection from others, what's the best way to support the youth in those situations?
I'll go first. Safety first for the youth, safety first. Sometimes it's not safe for that kid to come out at home. It's not. It's either not safe with mom, it's not safe with dad, it's not safe with the grandparents, it's not safe with the sibling. It might not be safe. So really navigating the safety aspect for youth who are under the age of 18, because there aren't a lot of resources for homeless youth. So if they're thrown out or they're neglected or they're abused physically or verbally because of their identity, because of the coming out process, I think navigating coming out thoughtfully and having some safety plans in place for that youth is really, really important.
I think that's just spot on. I mean, I ditto that completely because, we overthink all the other parts, but it's like that, if you don't have something to offer, then don't put it out there, because the truth is that we need to get our resources set up, and then those of us we as leaders in the community or as adults in the community need to really push back and hold our organizations accountable and our government officials accountable and say, like, this is important to us. This is how we build resilient communities, and this is how we battle adverse childhood experiences equitably across the board, including the LGBTQ plus community. So we need to have high expectations, and we need to hold people accountable to including everyone. So, and that's not easy because, that is never easy to push back and say, you know what? No, that's not okay to do it like that. We do need more in this particular area, or, no, don't do a program on coming out with youth, because you don't, like, that's going to be dangerous, and you don't even have a clue why it's dangerous at all. Just not a clue. And we as adults in this room, and we all know, we come out every day. We come out every day, multiple times a day. And sometimes it's a 0 and sometimes it's a 10. And we have had therapy and resources. I mean, so we have to be, we're just on constant education mode, teaching people how to try to do this right, and then being humble and saying, you know what, I messed up, got to change the form. So I really appreciate that, Brian, that because we're all just like, we're trying to create something that's never been created, and we're going to do it.
So in situations in which another adult is saying things that are inappropriate, like you'll grow out of it or you don't know what you want, are there ways that y'all have found effective in responding to them?
I think for me, it's been being that safe place, affirming their whatever is authentic for them, but also going over, like what Brian said about safety, like the people that weren't accepting or that, weren't just taking them as their authentic self. Is that someone that is of a danger to them? Is that their parents? What support do they need? Meeting them where they're at. What can I do to help you in that moment? But then just being the person that hears them and accepts them completely and gives them the affirmation that they were hoping that other person would give. I always try to help them see about maybe where that person is coming from, so that they can have that space to tolerate them if they have to, like if it's their parents or their siblings or loved ones that they can't necessarily put space between them, because that's the other part, is just not feeling comfortable in that space anymore. And as children, they may not have that option to not go back to that space. So if you are met with someone that needs that support, it's meeting them where they're at and being that safe and affirming place, whatever that may look like, because each kiddo and each person and their experiences are all very different. And so it's hard to give just a simple answer, but trying to meet them where they're at.
I also want to mention, there are, depending on the audience and who we're talking to, some of us are mandated reporters, and there are often times where kids are in situations where they are unsafe, and not affirming a trans child's identity is neglect and abuse. And so there are times where that abuse and neglect is so overt and damaging that child should be removed from that home. And us as mandated reporters, whether we're teachers, we're therapists, we're volunteer workers, your community members, some of us are mandated to report that kind of stuff. And so it's not off the table just because someone has a deeply held religious belief. If they're neglecting and abusing that child verbally, physically, mentally, withholding food, all of that stuff, because of their identity, that stuff can be reported. And we leave it up to CWS to do the investigation on that. But it should definitely be reported if we're concerned about the child's welfare in that home.
And then we have to worry and wonder, is the child welfare service organization going to respond, or do they hold those same beliefs as the family, particularly here in the Central Valley, which is not a stretch. Like we all have experiences I'll speak for myself. I know that that's true, that's another risk factor of making that decision, which is just challenging. So that's the battle around the systemic pieces, you know, lining up against the personal pieces. So yeah, and whew.
Seems like that was a very good advice, and that things are definitely case by case. And you all have said multiple times before that you can't necessarily apply a blanket solution to individual problems. So thank you. We do have about 25 minutes left. I did want to touch on a question that's very relevant due to the pandemic. COVID has pushed many aspects of our lives online, including education. And what impacts have y'all witnessed on our youth living most of their day-to-day lives at home versus at school or out in public? How have they found support? And as we return in person, what are some of the challenges we can expect, and how can we mitigate those challenges?
From my experience, I've found that a lot of kids are actually whom were maybe already out at home prior to the pandemic have found it to be safer depending on their school environment, being able to dress authentically or represent themselves more authentically and in safe at home environments. And so the fear of returning to school and then having to kind of back that up a bit because maybe they can't dress affirming at school or dress in the representation that they feel most comfortable with at school. And so that's kind of one of my concerns for kids going back, is if the school environment is safe. Of course, that's on the school districts and the schools to mitigate, right, and provide safer environments. But then the other flip side to that is the isolation and the being stuck in environments that may not be supportive to them, and that they don't have contact with other adults that they gain those relationships from and that support from. And in that way, I'm looking forward to kids being able to get out of their homes and be able to go to places like the center and have areas away from the home and school that are safe and affirming. So like all things, right, it's just very complicated, and there will ever be changing circumstances that we have to kind of learn to navigate to help these kiddos be safe. But for me, it was one of those that I was glad to see, is that some kids were able to live more authentically because they didn't have school to kind of consider in that process. But of course, not all kids.
I would just add to that and say that all of the youth, right, like any of the kids, queer or not, have been impacted by the fact that, you know, school has been online or they've been stuck at home. Because, I mean, we all know in the Central Valley, you know, a lot of people are impacted by all sorts of different circumstances, including poverty, you know, and kids haven't had the support that they need education wise. If their parents have to go to work, they haven't had, you know, been able to have somebody. Not everybody has the luxury or the privilege to have parents at home to help them with whatever. And I think the most important part there has been to support our children's mental health, right? Queer or straight, or, you know, to make sure that the kids that are stuck at home, whatever circumstances surround them in that home, that they have something that they can do outside of virtual school to connect, because the isolation has been detrimental to everyone. And the youth are especially impacted. And I mean, basically one of my children, well, both of them have missed, you know, a whole year and a half of school. So I think it's important to keep in mind that they may have trouble adjusting, going back out into the world. I mean, as an adult, it's been weird, right? post global pandemic, being around lots of people, but also kind of exciting. But there may be some anxiety around going out into the world with potentially still variants of the virus around. And for the kids who have not been out, it's been especially difficult for them who don't have supportive parents and cannot connect with their friends at school who may be the supportive ones. So some of the things that the center did was allow for virtual groups for those folks. And then it's also a matter of them having the technology and the privacy to be able to join those and be themselves. So it's just been really difficult for all kids, but especially the kids who don't have supportive families and are LGBTQ plus and can't see their friends. And, so I think mitigating that has been to try to put whatever resources we can online for them to get to. But moving forward, we look forward to seeing them in person and be able to have that safe space in the center.
I know for the people that I've come in contact with, the EOC having, I'm part of Trans Emotion also, and so we have 2 support groups a month for adults, but the center offering them almost every day at varying times of the day has really helped, because then people are able to get that support based on what they have access to, right? Maybe they have free time or privacy at a different part of the day, because in the evenings, people are home. And so that was great to have this center have times throughout the day that I could refer people to, knowing that they hopefully would be able to find a time that was safer for them to be authentic and open and talk. But sometimes even for us, we've had people who've joined and just listened because the people around them, they couldn't participate in the group, but they did want to feel connected in some way and acknowledge that they were showing up. But yeah, having the center and all those different support group times and days really made it a lot easier for people to find that support and connect. And so that's been great. And I appreciate that, Jen, and all your staff and their hard work throughout the day to be able to provide that. It's helped a lot of people be able to feel connected.
I think for us, we had a youth program with about 20 to 30 kids in it before the pandemic. And I would say on average, that has gone down like 60%, 70%. I mean, and that's a pretty generous estimate. A lot of the kids are exhausted from being online. They do not want to engage on Zoom. They're just like us. We don't want to be in front of a computer any more than we have to. But there are those that cannot get to groups, or we're never able to get to groups because of transportation issues. So some of those kiddos really enjoy being able to connect online and would prefer not having to navigate transportation or lie to get somewhere from another place to another. So I think what we're looking at in the future is probably a hybrid version of groups where folks who can come will come, and folks who can't can do it from home. And then we, of course, are always learning from our youth. They're like, hey, why don't we have a Discord channel? And the old folks are like, what's Discord? So, they have ways of communication that work better for them because they're either more anonymous, they're not as intrusive in their own personal space. And so we've said, great, you want to do it, let's have you lead it. And organize it and create it. And so that's been really helpful, but yeah, it's been really hard to engage youth because when things are online, it feels like school, and they just want to be with each other. And that's what we were able to provide them before, was in-person community that they didn't get anywhere else. And so that you can't really replicate that, but we've tried.
I think everybody said it.
So we have about 14 minutes or so. I want to leave about 5 minutes at the end for y'all to give your contact info and where people can find you. But about for the next 10 minutes or so, I did want to first reach out to April and Dr. B, and then reach out to Jen and Brian. So April and Dr. B, what are some ways that youth and their guardians or parents can determine if counseling or therapy services they're seeking are affirming and accepting?
Well, go ahead, April.
No. Go ahead, Dr. B.
You sure?
Yep.
All right. So I say go straight through the front door and ask, and interview the organization, interview the people who are going to be working with the children, the kiddos, whoever they are, youth, adolescents. You don't want to take any risks here. Our kids are already experiencing too many risks. So go straight through the front door and just say, tell me a little bit about how you feel about LGBT community. How do you work with youth who have, who's whatever you're coming through the door for, ask the question and interview them. I think that's true about doctors. I think that's true about therapists. I think that's true about any service that you're going to pay money for or receive a service for, that as the adult in charge, that it's our responsibility to hold the people the professional accountable and make choices that are in the best interest of our kids. So that's really, and I would check in on that with my child, with my youth, with even an adult, and I say to people all the time, you know what, you can fire your therapist. It's a thing. Like if it's not working for you, like you're in charge, you can do that. So making sure that, because here's the thing, by not having a response to that question is a response to that question.
Yes.
That tells us everything we need to know right there. Oh, you don't know? Then you're not affirming, because in this day and age, you need to know. In this profession, you need to know. That is your job and your responsibility, like we were saying before. And it's not the child's job to educate the therapist or the teacher or anybody. So walking straight through the front door and saying, here's what I need to know. And they either pass the test or they don't. And if they don't, then they can go back to school and figure it out.
Yeah. So I guess if we're looking for like the easy way, there are little keywords, right? Like affirming should be in there somewhere. If affirming's not in there, but if you go to their Psychology Today and they have LGBT or trans, I can't think of the little click boxes. Just because they have those clicked doesn't mean they're actually affirming. It could mean that they're aware. And if the problem isn't related, then maybe it won't be an issue. However, if they think they're aware, but then they say or do the wrong things, that could be more hurtful than not. So the keywords from the beginning would be, if it's just their box, but they don't mention the community in their bio, they don't mention affirming care in their bio, reduce that list, right? And so then once you have your list of people who have met the keywords, it is calling. It's calling, having that conversation, asking for a consultation, asking what you're there for. For those of us who are trans parents who need a gender specialist therapist because you're trying to get transgender health care, WPATH is also a place to get a list or the beginnings of a list. If they're not on the WPATH website, which is wpath.com, I believe, if they're not on that website, then that would reduce your list even further on people that you can call. But call, ask the terms, say what's going on for you, where you identify, and their response. And if it doesn't feel right, then take them off the list, because like Dr. B mentioned, as therapists, we are taught that people aren't going to jive with us. They're not going to always connect. And I joke that it's somewhat like dating, that if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And that's perfectly okay. If my personality and your personality just don't click, I need you to go to work with somebody who it will click with, because that's where the most growth and progress comes from. And so if you fire your therapist because they just weren't a good fit and you move on to the next, that is okay. And you don't owe them anything. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And if they don't like that, then you needed to have fired them anyways. And that's perfectly okay. But I would think just the calling and the talking and the asking the questions, because if they don't know a term or they don't react in a way that feels right, then you know that it doesn't feel right, and that, to move on.
Can I add one more thing? Because telehealth has actually opened the door. I mean, just blown the door off of our choices of who we can see. And so that opens, gets us out of the Central Valley if we need to, in terms of finding somebody who is affirming and educated and knows how to navigate this, these complex waters. But also another suggestion is, as a parent, if you're trying to find a therapist for a child who's come out, a kiddo who's come out, or an adolescent who's struggling, then take an ally, take an LGBTQ person with you. Take them with you. Let them help you pick somebody, because if you're the parent, you already don't know. So, and we don't want to have the kiddo have to be the parent in the room. So get somebody who can be the expert for you, because we are experts in our own life and our own experience. And when we're part of a marginalized community, we do become hypersensitive and hypervigilant about those little subtle things that go, ooh, yeah, I didn't like that. Why is that in the room? Like, what is that? You were just like sensitive to it. And if we've done some therapy, like, we can blow it off, but we're like, oh yeah, do you see that? What? But for, like, that's how serious we need to take these things. 1, get out of town if you need to. 2, take somebody who's an expert in their experience and let them run it through their hypersensitive LGBTQ plus filter for you, because you can't do it. Like, you just can't do it. So those are some parenting tips. And if you're gonna be the parent of a gay kid, then guess what? You better find some gay friends. Like, you need to get out there and put and that's the perfect experience for parents, is to say, okay, I don't have any gay friends. I need to go find some. Like, I need to go meet the community that I am now a part of, because they didn't know it and they didn't know what they were missing. And now look, they get to join the party.
Jen and Brian, touching on, I guess, the importance of safe spaces. You both are leaders in LGBTQ resource centers in the Central Valley. Really quickly, why is it important for these spaces to be held specifically for that community?
Should I go first? I can go first.
Sure.
So safe places in Fresno County are limited to begin with, and I think in Tulare County as well. In the Central Valley, safe places for the LGBTQ community are limited. And sometimes young people just need a place to feel safe where they can relax and relate to others and not have to hide who they are. As an adult in the Central Valley, I have recently encountered a person in Fig Garden Village yelling at me that the rainbow belonged to God and that I needed to take off my lanyard. So I think it was said already earlier that we have a lot of work to do. You know, we're going to continue, and it's not new, right? And it's changed over time, but it's still a thing that needs lots of work. And some people are never going to be accepting or affirming or tolerant at all. So for us to provide those places for our community is paramount. It's very important, especially for young people. And recently we had a client who had been out at the Tower demonstrations, who lives in Tower, who had been confronted by somebody from some probably hate group, and they were feeling really unsafe, and they didn't know what to do, and they were alone, and they were scared, and they were able to call us, during regular business hours, even though we're not technically open to the public. We're able to take that phone call and say, come on down, provide that safe spot for them to connect with friends who they could, go to their house after we closed, and also provide a safe place for an officer to come take a report and make sure that officer was going to be, compassionate and not be like, whatever, and make sure that they weren't going to be harassed by, maybe the police as well. So those types of environments are really important for the whole community. And I can't wait for us to all open up and be able to be back together and support each other and provide those spaces, especially for young people. So.
Yeah, I would just agree with what Jen said. Safety is so important. I have a couple things I want to say, and I wrote them down. So I think queer spaces are really important. And, there's a move to say we have a safe space, or but queer-led spaces you can't replicate that in a system that doesn't have queer leadership or queer people, because it's self-regulating. It's when someone says, hey, you did it wrong, we don't take offense, we just change it, right? Like, we're nimble, we're quick, we want people to be comfortable and safe. So queer-led spaces are really important. There are not a lot of them. In our area, we don't have any queer bars or clubs or anything like that. So, like, historically, adults, LGBT community could go to larger city centers and there would be an entire street dedicated to LGBT folks, right? A gay bar, a lesbian bar, our trans folks have been left out of that for quite a while. Our bi folks have been left out of that for quite a while. But there's just not a lot of that. A lot of those things existed here, but they were underground and secret. So there have been queer spaces in Tulare County, but they were secret, right? Secret societies and secret clubs. And what that does to us is it perpetuates homophobia and transphobia and biphobia. And we internalize that as LGBT people. And then we project that out onto our youth, right? Without even knowing it, right? This isn't safe. You can't do this. You can't open up a space. You can't have a center. When we were opening 5 years ago, half of our board didn't want us to put a sign up, right? Because we would be a sitting duck, right? And so we had to really take a leap of faith, because we were working with traumatized individuals that had been bullied and beaten and loss of family and all of the things that happened to them here locally. So safe space is important. Queer spaces are important. But the last thing I want to say is we need allies to stand in front of us at pride events, at flag ceremonies, at all of the things that LGBT folks have been bouncing up against in the Central Valley, especially during Pride Month right now. It is so much easier to get a proclamation passed when a straight, white, cis guy writes it on the city council. It's a no-brainer. The second a queer person writes it or asks for it, it's an agenda. And so we need allies to stand up for us, because things get done faster. And a lot of queer folks aren't safe and don't feel safe enough to be out protesting or in the streets because their lives are at stake. You know, they can't be out on the street corner in the tower because they might get followed home. So we really need straight allies and cis allies to be out there fighting with us and for us.
Thank you. And I definitely acknowledge your point as to needing allies, and also understanding that the allies should follow the leadership of the queer community as well. And while they may stand up in the face of adversity, not to take the spot of the queer folks who need to be heard and need to be listened to. And hopefully that will help us shift away from needing a certain face in order to pass laws. So definitely appreciate what everyone has said about that. And last thing, if y'all could just let the audience know where they can find you, where they can find your organization, and if they want to connect, what can they do? We could start with April and Dr. B, Jen, and Brian.
For me, it's affirmingfamilycounseling.com for my private practice. And even if there are not necessarily clinical questions, but just like parents looking for support as another parent, that's also the best way to contact me. If you're looking for other resources and support, that my website, but also transemotion.com or through Transemotion's website or social media, to ask questions and get resources also. But clinically, it's Affirming Family Counseling. Thank you.
If you want to reach out to me, you can listen to my podcast, Delusional Optimism. New episodes come out every Monday. And you can check out Linktree, Delusional Optimism, and then you can listen on any platform that you choose. So Spotify, Apple, iHeart. Or you can find me at www.drbconnections.com. And you can learn all kinds of stuff there about if you want to talk to me, or if you want to connect with me, or if you need support in some certain way. But thank you, Gavin, for saying that we need allies, but we really need co-conspirators. We need people who stand with us, who let us do our work, but are there in support of us not taking over our stories and the work that we already know. We're already the experts in our lives. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And it's so great to meet all of you. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everybody for participating in this discussion and for the invite. And we are available by email or phone right now, lgbtq@fresnoeoc.org. I'll drop it in the chat. Our phone number is 559-325-4.
Jen, you accidentally hit mute near the end of your phone number. So could you repeat the phone number again, please?
I'm so sorry. 559-325-4527. Let me move that arrow so I don't accidentally do it again. And we are in the center Monday through Friday and even on some weekends. So by appointment, if you need us, you can call or email. And then social media has all of our events, all of our virtual support groups, and we'll have all the information on reopening to the public. So the social media handle is FresnoEOC.LGBTQ on Facebook and Instagram. And do look out for the first in-person event with Moss Fresno and Dulce up front and Brian from The Source this Saturday of 12 to 3 at Mariposa and Fulton on the corner there. It's going to be a hybrid event. And end of the month, look out for our in-person second annual Illuminate Our Pride with the center. It's going to include, hopefully when we get our permit, all sorts of resources, food, and then an incentivized vaccination clinic in the center because of the Department of Public Health. So they'll be administering those and there'll be money. So people look out for that.
Okay, so we're online and on all the social medias at the Source LGBT. You can reach out to us online at thesourcelgbt.org. On there, you can reach us through like a messaging app. You can call the center at 559-429-4277. We opened up our drop-in center last week, so we're open now to the public. And yeah, anytime you need help, support, education, advocacy, anything, give us a call. We're happy to help. And thank you, Gavin, so much for your questions, your time, and your framing of everything. I really appreciated the conversation. It's such a pleasure to share space with everybody here today. And I always come into these things with the intention of learning, and I did. So I feel like it was an awesome day. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming. I learned a lot as well, and it was really great to hear all of your different perspectives on this. As Department of Behavioral Health, I just wanted to plug in that on June 25th, we're doing another panel discussion called Improving Care Through Understanding the Intersectionalities of LGBTQ Persons Served. You could also view that on Facebook or YouTube Live. It'll be moderated by Dr. Tiffany White, attended by Steve Seiko, who's in the county LMFT, Lisa Anderson, who works for CASA, or Henry Mraz, who is also a therapist and founder of Safe and Affirming Counseling, and then Dr. Dutile, PhD, Exodus Recovery. So if you're interested in learning more about improving care for the LGBT community, attend that June 25th, 12 to 1:30 p.m. Thank you all for attending. Oh, and Brian did also mention that our LGBTQ pop-ups start June 23rd, so be on the lookout for that as well. Thank you all, and have a good day.
The recording has stopped.